Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 12 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. And in today's video I'll also be recapping the press conference and injury updates too. If you get any use from today's video, please do smash a like, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first three quarters of the video today will be press conference and injury updates around those key players, discussing replacements and transfers out too. Then we'll answer some questions that you just generally have around Game Week 12. And right at the end, I'll also go through my team in a little bit of detail and just discuss what my updated transfer plans are. If you do want to see my final transfers, of course, make sure to tune into tomorrow's deadline stream, Saturday morning, 2 hours before the deadline, I'll be going live. But the first thing I wanted to discuss is Spurs in general, but also Maddison's injury update and replacements for him, because it does look like he'll be out for a while. So on the the Tottenham injury list, Postecoglou said Van de Ven will be out for at least a couple of months, looking to the new year. Sadly, Maddison will also be out for at least a couple of months, looking towards the new year as well. The timescale that some other sort of journalists have put on it is approximately 1 to 3 months. But even if it's 1 month, because we've got a few deadlines coming thick and fast, that's probably 5 or 6 game weeks. So regardless of whether it's 1 month or 3 months, I think Maddison is a sell in FPL. Of course, Richarlison is out for around a month too. The positive news for Spurs is that Pedro Porro looks like he'll be available, and so will Davis as well. So they do actually have fullbacks available. Sadly, they don't have many centre-backs available. It'll probably be like Højbjerg and maybe Dyer. So not the strongest defence, but at least Spurs do have some defenders back and available. But what I wanted to focus on here is Maddison, because a lot of people own Maddison. 50% of the top 100k own Maddison. And I think even if you've not got Maddison, you may still well be looking for a midfield transfer at the moment. We're going to discuss Saka in one of the future sections on this video. And it may well be that you need to make a midfield transfer at the moment. And I didn't have enough space on the screen to put all of the players that I wanted to talk about. And to be honest, I could genuinely, and I mean this, record an hour-and-a-half video talking just about the midfielders at the moment. So this section isn't going to be an in-depth look at every single midfielder, but I think these are most of the key midfielders that I would be considering at the moment on your screen as a replacement for Maddison. You can see Kieran Trippier there. I'll discuss that in a second. But I think the way that I'm looking at it at the moment is right now, the players on the bottom, so Bowen, Saka, Eze, Matoma, Mbeumo and Martinelli. At the moment, they're like my tier 1 replacements for Maddison, the ones that I am really considering. Obviously, I already own Bowen and Saka, and there are some injury doubts around Saka, which we'll discuss in a few sections. But assuming that they're all fit and available, those are the ones that I would really be considering. And then at the back, you can see Kudus, Trossard, Gordon. I do still really like Gordon. He's almost tier 1. Bruno Fernandes and Cole Palmer, who are like my tier 2 replacements. I will actually discuss the Kieran Trippier idea now before we go back onto the midfielders. I do think the most sensible thing to do, if you're in a 3-5-2 or something like that, and you've got Maddison in your team, I think the most sensible thing to do, because there are so many good midfielders at the moment, is just to bring in another really good midfielder, because there are so many good options. But Kieran Trippier is an elite FPL option, and I think he will continue to be, and the fixtures really aren't that bad coming up as well. They've got quite a few home games coming up, even though the fixtures aren't ideal, and the away games look relatively decent on paper too. And that spell from sort of, I think it's Game Week 16 to Game Week 18, especially in Game Week 18, or 17 to 19, I think it is, but specifically in Game Week 18 as well, Newcastle, which is a blank game week, have a really nice fixture. So I still think Trippier is going to continue to be a good option. And what you could do, if you're in a 3-5-2 with Maddison, take out Maddison for a £4.5 million midfielder, and then maybe replace like a Tsimikas with Trippier, and then you play in a 4-4-2. And I don't have an issue with that at all. Yes, the midfielders are very valuable, but do you strongly think that Kieran Trippier definitely won't outscore a lot of these midfielders? I'm not so sure. He's incredibly consistent. So you do have that option there if you want to move to a 4-4-2 and actually just shift the funds into that Kieran Trippier spot. But for me, I think maybe the more sensible thing would be to just bring in another midfielder. It really depends on a few different things. What is the horizon for you bringing in this player? Are you just taking a 2-week punt because you know in Game Week 14 you want to move to Mbeumo? Or are you looking more for sort of 4 to 5 game weeks because in Game Week 16, 17, you know you want to bring in Cole Palmer as an example? Or are you bringing in this player with no game week horizon in mind? And what I mean by that is, are you just bringing in this player indefinitely and thinking that you could keep them through the Christmas period? Because I think the answer to that will massively impact who you bring in. For example, Bruno Fernandes is on 4 yellow cards and has Luton this week. If it's a 1 or 2 week punt, I still like him as an option. If it's beyond that, he's going to be suspended very soon, and Manchester United's fixtures turn for the worst. It's kind of a similar situation with like a Gordon. Gordon's got a great fixture this week, but then from an attacking perspective going forward over the next 4 or 5, I'm not as convinced. Cole Palmer, great long term. I guarantee almost everyone will want him from sort of game week 16 onwards, and we're going to discuss, again, Cole Palmer in a later section today, but you probably don't want him over the next couple. So it really is kind of team dependent and dependent on how long you need this player for and whether you need them immediately. There are certain things that we look for in midfielders though, and I think being nailed, being on set pieces, and being on penalties are 3 huge things that can just add to the amount of returns that a player can get, outside of just obviously expected data. And especially with game week 14 to 16, those 3 game weeks are all in the space of 1 actual week. So we have a midweek deadline. So a lot of teams will play Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday. And I think across that spell, if you bring in someone like a Kudus or a Martinelli, maybe even a Matoma, there is a chance that they either come off early in all of them or maybe start on the bench in one of them. So I think for that reason, being nailed on in a team is maybe even more important than it usually is. And then after those 3 game weeks, we're of course starting to get towards the Christmas break. The Christmas period, I should say. Again, when there are quite a few fixtures coming thick and fast. So I think being nailed on is quite a big advantage if you're looking for a player longer term. So the players that tick all of those boxes, there are only 2 of them at the moment for me. And that is Eze and Mbeumo, right? Eze and Mbeumo are on pretty much all set pieces. Once Elise's back, you might take some off of Eze. They're on penalties. Once Tony's back, if he stays at Brentford, he might take pens off of Mbeumo. But for the time being, on all set pieces, on penalties, and when they're both fit, they will play 90 minutes in every single game. So I think if you're looking for a safe, reliable option with multiple routes to points and good fixtures coming up, Mbeumo and Eze are the 2. Of course, Mbeumo's fixtures are only good from game week 14, though, whereas Eze's are pretty good now. So Eze is genuinely a really, really good option, but I know he's trolled a lot of people and people don't necessarily trust the Crystal Palace attack. So if you're not looking at those 2, let's say that Saka is fit. Saka is another player that is on some penalties, some set pieces, and is also, when he's fit, a 90-minute man. But there are injury doubts around him, so I don't know if this is the week to bring him in when we're not sure if he's going to start or not. So there's some concerns there. Jared Bowen continues to be a great option. 90-minute man once again. Not on all set pieces by any means, because he won't take penalties, and Ward-Prowse takes most corners and free kicks, but does take the odd set piece, 90 minutes every game, really good data, and the fixtures coming up for West Ham are pretty good too. So whilst he doesn't have as many routes to points, I do like how nailed on he is. And then I think you've got 2 or 3 other options, or maybe 4 other options that are really good from sort of open play, goal threat, attacking threat, and the fixtures are there. You've got the likes of Matoma, Martinelli, Kudus, Trossard could be a decent short-term punt, and then maybe Anthony Gordon too. I know I've just given you loads of options and I've not really said who I prefer, because I think it is so dependent on what your team looks like and what you look for in an asset. But the players, so I own Maddison. I also already own Bowen and Saka. If I didn't own Bowen and Saka, I probably won't bring in Saka this week now, just due to the doubts we've got, which we'll discuss soon. But Bowen is a player that I would probably look to bring in. So Bowen might be towards the top of my list. But for me, because I own Bowen and Saka, I'm looking at either Maddison to Eze, Matoma, Mbeumo, or Martinelli, right? So the 4 just here, one of those 4, Eze, Matoma, Mbeumo, Martinelli, they're probably the 4 that I'm considering to replace Maddison with. And it just really depends. Like, I know for a fact I'm going to want Mbeumo from game week 14. So if I bring in someone else for Maddison, they're probably going to be the one that makes way for Mbeumo. So if I just show you my team, it might actually help with this. This is the way that my team currently looks, right? I've got Salah, Son, and Saka, and Bowen, assuming that Saka isn't injured long-term and I don't want to replace him. I don't think I really want to replace any of those 4 options at the moment. Yes, Son might struggle in the absence of Maddison, in which case I may look to sell him. But let's say that I don't want to remove those 4 because I think they're all brilliant assets. That Maddison spot, I know for a fact I'm going to want to bring in Mbeumo in game week 14, right? That is non-negotiable unless he gets injured. So Mbeumo will be coming in 14 for me. If I want to keep those other 4 assets, then whoever I bring in this week is only going to be a 2-week punt anyway, because I'm then going to want to move to Mbeumo. So realistically, I don't need to look at a particularly long horizon. I just need to look at who do I think will score well over the next couple, which makes me start to lean towards the likes of Matoma and Martinelli, maybe Eze, because the fixtures over the next 2 are pretty good. So I think this is incredibly dependent upon what your team looks like, what you're looking for from the player, and what your risk appetite is like. But if you're looking longer term, I think someone like an Mbeumo or an Eze, just because they are so, or even a Bowen, so nailed on, and especially with Eze and Mbeumo, so many different routes to points, including penalties, you're just increasing your chances every single week of getting an attacking return. If you do own Maddison, or maybe you're just making a midfield transfer this week. I would love to know down below in the comments which midfielders you're currently looking at. So Arteta continues to be the most frustrating manager in FPL at the moment, and he's making Pep Guardiola look like an angel. Guardiola barely rotates. Arteta doesn't rotate, but he's so frustrating in press conferences. Eddie Howe is also being very frustrating at the moment, but Arteta definitely takes the crown. And of course, we didn't really expect an update, but still very frustrating. He basically just said over the next 24 hours, they'll assess all of the injury doubts. So we didn't get an update on Jesus, we didn't get an update on Nketiah, we didn't get an update on Ødegaard, and we didn't really get an update on Saka, but Saka was the one we got the most information from, but it was just that Saka didn't train yesterday. Now, there's a couple of things to note on this. Saka himself has not trained the day before the press conference and then gone on to start and play 90 minutes in the games on multiple occasions with Arteta as the manager. And other players have as well. Do you remember the week where Maddison didn't train just before the press conference? We came out in the videos on Friday and said, Maddison's not been in training, therefore we think he's out. And then Maddison went on to play. So just because he didn't train yesterday doesn't mean that he doesn't play. And the reason for that is with the amount of workload that a lot of players have at the moment, not training is sometimes an intentional thing to give them a rest. Not training isn't necessarily because Saka was injured. He didn't say that. He just said that he didn't train yesterday. So it may well have been an intentional thing. Maybe the injury felt fine, but they just wanted to give him an extra day off and then they'll put him back in training on Friday. So sadly, this gives us absolutely no information, in my opinion, about whether Saka will start or not. I generally do feel like when Saka's available, he plays. But of course, Burnley at home is one of the easier fixtures at the moment. And I think the other players in that starting 11 are playing pretty well. I think if they have sort of Trossard available, they have Martinelli available, they could play Reece Nelson on the right. I think they could get away with resting in Saka in this game, but that doesn't mean that they're going to do it. I just think if there is a week to not risk him, this may well be it. My natural inclination is that he probably will start just because it's Bukayo Saka. I think it's probably a situation where you probably don't buy and you don't sell unless you are strongly opinionated. Unless you're like, of course, Ross, like, of course Saka's going to play, then go for it and go and buy him. Or if you're of the opinion, of course they're not going to risk him, like it seems pretty obvious to me, then go ahead and sell him if you want to. But for me, it's probably just a situation where if you've got him, you start him and hope that he plays. Or if you've got really strong bench, you could potentially bench him. But I'm not sure off the back of this that I would go out and buy him, because on top of that, I mean, he's not been great anyway. If I just show you my team, because I think, again, it helps give you a little bit of context. So just on Saka recently, 0.27 XGI against Newcastle, but Newcastle are a great defence. Against Sheffield United in 72 minutes, he put up 0 XG and 0.06 as expected assist. Now, this wasn't a game that was difficult. I mean, Arsenal created a hell of a lot of chances, and Nketiah got a hat-trick. Against Chelsea, 0.16. Bournemouth was a big one. So was Tottenham, but obviously I think he got a penalty in the Spurs game. But he hasn't been great in the last few weeks. Looks like he is carrying at least one or two issues. And maybe even if he is fit, while he's like this, maybe he's not the best option anyway. The reason that I am leaning towards keeping him, as you can see, I've got Alvarez on the bench at the moment. I don't want to bench Alvarez at all. I think that City could comfortably put 2, 3, 4 goals past that Chelsea team. And as a result, I wouldn't mind at all if Saka misses out. And I don't think Saka's the sort of player that they will take and bring off the bench. I think Saka either starts if he's fit or he doesn't make the squad if he's not fit. So I think if you're in a similar position to me where you've got a first sub that you really, really like and you don't mind playing, then I think you leave it as is. Otherwise, you could look to sell him if you want to. But the fact that Arteta actually lies sometimes, not just conceals the truth, he actually outright lies sometimes, that would make me think that I don't want to trust anything he says. It didn't look overly serious when Saka went off with the knock. So, again, just to recap, I think for me, it is probably don't buy, don't sell. Just hold and start. But if you don't feel comfortable with that, then you can obviously make the decisions and around that. I would just say that there is an international break between 12 and 13. So even if Saka's confirmed not available for 12, maybe we get some embargoed quotes or some leaked information, there's a good chance you want him from sort of game week 13 to 19, 20 anyway. So it may well be, even if he is confirmed out for 12 at some point, that you might just want to hold on to him regardless. So there's that. And on Nketiah, I mean, we don't have any information on him, sadly. I think that it will be very touch and go. I genuinely think there'll be a late test. But I think Trossard looked very, very good against Sevilla. Again, this is they don't really need to risk players, especially with the fact that Jesus doesn't look like he's back immediately either. I don't think they want to lose Nketiah as well longer term. So my opinion as of now is probably that the front three will be what we saw against Sevilla, which is Martinelli, Trossard and Saka, but that is a complete guess. I've got nothing to back that. I would love to know what your opinion of it is down below. I've just realised as I'm recording that the rank above my head keeps changing, just to keep you on your toes, but the rank that is now currently above my head is the correct one, so we've got a green arrow and we're inside the top 400k. Not that it's anything to boast about, but moving on to the Newcastle updates. As I said, Howe is very vague, and he has been for a while now, but not quite as bad as Arteta. But the information that we have is on Isak, Botman and Wilson. So Isak is building up his fitness levels at the moment. He's working on his loan. He's trying to be back post-international break, which will probably be the case for a lot of players at the moment. On Callum Wilson, he is unfortunately a doubt at the moment. So you can see here, Callum has a tight hamstring. We're doing various tests on him. We'll see how he is this morning before making a decision on the game. Other than that, we see no fresh injuries from the other night. Botman, before we then discuss all of it, no massive news on Sven. He's progressing well. He has been away in the Netherlands getting specialist treatment. I think he's back here today, so I will chat with him and see how he is getting on. So quickly on the striker situation, obviously Isak won't be back for this week based on this, and in my opinion, I don't see any reason why they would risk Callum Wilson, unless he's lying about it being a tight hamstring. Hamstrings are not things that you want to mess with. I mean, we saw this recently with Van der Ven. It's a terrible injury. When it goes wrong, you can need surgery. You can be out for as long as 3 to 4 months. So I don't think, especially when they've got such injury issues already with Isak and Wilson, that you risk someone that has a severely tight hamstring, as Wilson does, because it's cropped up a couple of times now. Especially given that it's not an overly difficult fixture, and that the next 2 fixtures for Newcastle against Chelsea and Manchester United are obviously much more important, probably on paper harder fixtures. So in my opinion, not that it's necessarily worth much, I don't think they'll risk Wilson. I think it will be Gordon as the number 9 against Bournemouth. I don't think, for what it's worth, that makes Gordon a better option. I think Gordon on the left or Gordon as the number 9, he's great in both positions. I don't think just because he goes central all of a sudden, it makes him a better option. I know it has made, for example, Heung-min Son a better option, but we've seen in the past with some different players. I know Salah played centrally a couple of times, as did Mane. Sometimes when players go centrally, that isn't necessarily the best thing. Marcus Rashford is another good example. I actually prefer him on the left. So I think Gordon's great for what it's worth, but I don't think it makes him a better option when you put him through the middle. So I don't think Isak or Wilson be available, but that's just my opinion and my interpretation. You can see the exact quotes in front of you and feel free to make your own opinion on that. On Botman, I think Botman's issue appears to be quite serious, right? We've been thinking for a few weeks now he's going to be back. The fact that he is getting specialist treatment in the Netherlands, I know this says that he returns today. That doesn't mean returns to training. It just means he returned back to Newcastle. I think Botman will be out for at least a month based on these quotes. I would be surprised to see him feature in 2023. However, he is incredibly important to their defence, and I think as soon as he is back, I don't think he'll be rushed back, but he won't certainly be held off for too long. So I'm just making random guesses here, but I would say a minimum of 4 weeks, probably a maximum of sort of 10 to 12 based on this. All of that to say, as I said, there are lots of game weeks coming up thick and fast. I think if Botman's still only out for 4 to 6 weeks, that is at least kind of 5 or 6 FPL game weeks. So I think as a result, Lascelles is an absolutely fine pick, especially when you consider his price. And especially when you consider at that price, you've also got like Branthwaite, you've got Taylor if you want to go there as well. You currently have Harry Maguire at 4.2. So there are some other options in and around that price that if Lascelles does become a terrible option, you can go there. But for now, whilst Botman's out, Lascelles is completely nailed. And I don't think he carries much attacking threat, but he does still go up from corners. And we've seen recently he's not terrible for bonus points. So I do really like Lascelles as a pick. And I think if you've got no other transfers to make, maybe you've got a Taylor on your bench or someone like that, Lascelles is definitely an upgrade on any of the other defenders in and around that price. So I really like Lascelles. Livramento is a trickier one for me because we just don't have enough information at the moment. But generally from what we've seen, Howe definitely favours Livramento to Hull. So I think at the moment, Livramento, I think we all agree that Livramento is in Newcastle's favoured starting 11 at the moment, but we just don't know how long that will last. So we recently brought in Tsimikas because Tsimikas wasn't the only left-back available to Liverpool, but he was definitely first choice. Now people are talking about selling Tsimikas. We're all worried, especially due to rotation, due to the European games. Are we going to get a similar situation with Livramento? Potentially we are. It may well be that Newcastle decide to play Livramento right back and Kieran Trippier left back, which is what they've been doing in the last couple. What happens if Kieran Trippier looks absolutely terrible at left back, really, really struggles, he doesn't have much attacking outlet? Maybe they'll think, right, we want to switch Trippier back to right back because he's so effective there and he's so important to what the team does. Almiron and Trippier on that right side, pretty much everything goes through them. If that's the case, yeah, they can play Livramento left back, but it might be that Howe decides, if I'm putting Trippier at right back, I might as well play the more natural left back in Lewis Hall there, and then Livramento drops out. I also just don't think with Livramento's recent long-term injury that he is going to play 90 minutes in every single game. So it's not me saying that Livramento's a bad option, but he's certainly not as nailed as Lascelles. And as a result, I would worry, because it may well be that in the weeks that you need him, he's rested, and the weeks that you don't necessarily want to play him with the slightly trickier fixtures, maybe those are the weeks that he plays. So I would be a little bit concerned. I would even be slightly concerned about this game week. And I know people say that's crazy, but I just don't feel comfortable enough recommending him as an option, because I don't know yet, without a slightly bigger sample size to go off, that he is nailed enough to pick as an option. That being said, he obviously has a lot more attacking threat and a much higher ceiling than Lascelles, because we know how good he is going forward. We saw it for Southampton. We've seen it recently for Newcastle. We've also seen for Newcastle how attacking Trippier is. And I think especially if Livramento's on the right side rather than the left, he will be the one bombing up and down that flank. And Kieran Trippier may be playing a slightly more reserved role where he maybe whips in a few deep crosses. So I love Livramento as an option if he gets enough minutes, but I can't sit here comfortably as a content creator and suggest him to you when I just don't know if he's going to be nailed enough. So I'll let you decide on that. I think Lascelles is the more sensible pick for now, maybe longer term, because Burn is probably going to be out for longer than Botman based on what we have at the moment. Maybe longer term, it is Livramento that you want to get to though. So the final press conference update, going to be a very, very brief one, is around Nkunku. And it was Pochettino's update in his press conference, said, we had some conversations, and he said to me on Nkunku, Coach, I want to be ready. It's a very funny sort of story narrative. Coach, I want to be ready for after the international break for Newcastle. And then Pochettino said, you're a liar. And Nkunku said, no, I am not. I can be ready. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this press conference. So basically, Nkunku has told Pochettino, I don't know why Nkunku's the one telling him rather than the physiotherapist, but Nkunku has told Pochettino, hey boss, I'm going to be ready for the Newcastle game, which is game week 13 post-international break. Now, maybe he won't be fully available. Maybe it will just be that he's on the bench and gets a couple of minutes. But all of that to say, Nkunku is close to being back. And assuming that he doesn't re-aggravate the injury, he will definitely go straight back into the 11 as soon as he's fit. Now, I am of the opinion this doesn't affect Palmer's minutes. At least not significantly, because if Nkunku plays as the 10, I'm convinced that Palmer is one of the first two choices for the right wing or the left wing. So if Nkunku plays as the 10, I think Palmer will just probably shift out to the right. And I think what is more likely, because Jackson hasn't been very good, is Nkunku comes in as the 9 and Palmer slots in behind Nkunku. So minutes-wise, I don't think this affects Palmer, but it does make Nkunku a serious option when he's back. My concern is more around penalties. I'm not saying Palmer is a bad option, and he definitely carries some open play goal threat, and he definitely carries some open play creativity. We've seen that in recent weeks, but one of the major things that we loved so much about Palmer is that at around 5 million, you're not only getting a nailed attacker in, a decent attack with good fixtures coming up, but you're also getting a penalty take, and we know how valuable they are because Palmer's already scored 3, and Burmo's grabbed a few too, so has Salah. We've seen this season, especially with the way that VAR is, penalty takers are absolutely crucial in our FPL teams. So I do think this does reduce Palmer's appeal, but in my opinion, I don't think many people are going out and buying Palmer now anyway. I don't think it probably makes much sense to sell him, considering around game week 14, 15, 16, the fixtures really improved for Chelsea, and we don't know that Nkunku will just go straight back in, and we don't know that Nkunku won't potentially, fingers crossed for him and Chelsea he doesn't, but re-aggravate the injury. We saw that recently with Estepinian. So I don't think this would make me go out and sell Palmer. It wouldn't completely put me off him as an option. But I think if Nkunku is back and if Nkunku does take penalties, it certainly makes Palmer a slightly weaker option. And I think it will be something to consider around game week 15, 16, rather than moving to Palmer. If we have the funds, maybe we move to an Nkunku instead of obviously different positions too. But it's something to consider for sure. Something that I just wanted to draw your attention to. And if you were maybe considering picking up Palmer at the moment, maybe it is something that you just want to wait not only until the fixtures improve, but until Nkunku comes back in and you can get a bit of a better idea about how that might affect not only Palmer's minutes, but the penalty taking responsibilities as well. So something that I just spent a little bit of time doing was just going through the 4 teams that played in Europe on Thursday: West Ham, Brighton, Liverpool and Aston Villa, and just noting down the amount of minutes that some of their key assets for FPL got. If you do enjoy this, by the way, I can potentially do this for future videos as well. I can even do it maybe for the Wednesday and Thursday minutes. But I think specifically for those teams that play on Thursday, other than obviously West Ham, these teams aren't used to playing on Thursday, especially Brighton and Aston Villa. Their squads are looking a little bit thin all over the gaff for all of these teams here. And I think these are the teams that tend to struggle a little bit and maybe are more likely to rotate as a result come the weekend. So for West Ham, I think the main two that are of note at the moment, especially in the attack, is Bowen and Kudus. They both did play essentially 90 minutes. Kudus came off in the final couple. Bowen can play 90 minutes just so comfortably on such a consistent basis that wouldn't bother me. And I think Kudus is just comfortably first choice at the moment. So again, this wouldn't bother me, but maybe if, again, they are 1 or 2 goals up, Kudus might not be getting 90 minutes in this game as well, because I think that would then be 90 minutes 3 times in the space of a week. And I just don't know that he is comfortable doing that, especially based on the fact that he hasn't got that many minutes before this throughout the season. So I still think Kudus and Bowen start. I'd be slightly more concerned about Kudus' minutes with respect to when he comes off, though. It wouldn't put me off him as an option, though. For Brighton, there was a lot more information to sort of dissect. João Pedro, Matoma, and Adingra all played 90 minutes again. So slightly concerning, I think, for João Pedro, because I think most predictors now are expecting Ferguson to start once again. You can see Ferguson only got 25 minutes. So I think by all accounts, it's likely to be Ferguson as the 9, which leaves only the number 10 spot for João Pedro. So there's the possibility that he plays in that role. But then I think a lot of predictors, again, have got Lallana potentially starting in the 10. So this would put me off buying João Pedro. And I've seen some people, despite it being the best fixture on paper, Sheffield United at home, I've seen some people looking to sell him just because it looks like Ferguson and maybe a Lallana or even a Fati through the middle could be preferred to João Pedro. I also think that there is a small chance, just due to how, not easy the fixture is, but on paper it is one of the easier fixtures, that one of Matoma and Adingra don't start. And I know you might think, well, they just don't have the players to do that. I think they do just about, but it just does concern me that Matoma and Adingra have played so many minutes recently. But Adingra in particular has looked so impressive that I still think they'll start, but we could see early substitutions. And I think there's a very small chance that one of them doesn't start against Sheffield United. Ansu Fati has been brilliant recently. He got a goal and an assist, came off in the 65th minute, but I've seen a lot of predictions, again, still expecting him to be on the bench, despite the fact that he didn't get 90. So maybe that's not the best indication for anything there. And then the only other thing to note, sadly, Estepinian came off the bench and then got injured after 12 minutes. So it looked like it was a re-aggravation of his previous injury. Probably looks like Estepinian will be set for another spell on the sideline. So he looked like he could be a good option, and unfortunately now doesn't look like he will be. And I think that does affect Matoma. We have seen since Estepinian has been out, whilst the fixtures have also got a little bit more difficult too, Matoma just doesn't seem to play as well when he hasn't got Estepinian to link up with on that side. So Brighton is a little bit of a minefield at the moment. I think at the moment I'm leaning towards just avoiding them, but they obviously have such a great fixture this week. For Liverpool, a little bit more straightforward. Luis Diaz and Gakpo started the game and got pretty decent minutes, whereas Darwin and Jota didn't start the game and only got some minutes from the bench. Darwin got 17 minutes and Jota got 9 minutes. So by all accounts, it looks like the front three, probably not definitely, will be Salah, Darwin, Jota once again in the league. And at the moment, this does look like it seems to be the way that Klopp is preferring things. And obviously that is great news if you have Darwin. Should be set, fingers crossed, for another start. Salah got 45 minutes. Doesn't affect him. He's going to start and play 90 in every game anyway. Tsimikas was an interesting one. Started the game, but so did Gomez. Got 45 minutes and then came off. He was at fault for the first goal. And I'll be honest, it was an absolute stinker of a first half. But I do also think that there's a good chance that that substitution was planned anyway, because Salah came on at 45 minutes as well. There's not often that you get so many half-time subs unless they are planned subs. So I think there's a chance Tsimikas was only going to get half a game anyway. But it is a little bit worrying, and it maybe does put me off starting him, especially if you have a slightly better defender to come on. Like, if you've got a Crystal Palace defender on the bench, maybe you just don't risk it, because Brentford isn't an easy fixture, and I'm just a little bit worried about Tsimikas' minutes at the moment. I think it's maybe being overplayed slightly how much of a rotation risk he is, but I think if you have another decent option that you can rotate, maybe this is the week to potentially do it, because the fixture isn't even that great on paper. And then finally on Aston Villa, Watkins got 90 minutes again, scored again. A bit like Jared Bowen, Watkins can just play 90 minutes every single game. Diaby got 74 minutes, but he's playing so well that I don't think there's much chance of Diaby being benched, especially when the likes of Bailey also played significant minutes. So Watkins and Diaby are absolutely fine. Matty Cash got 16 minutes, which I think is great. It shows that he's not injured enough to at least play minutes. And because it's a shoulder injury that Matty Cash had, I think there's a very good chance that he can just go and play 90 minutes, right? It's not like it's a muscular thing with his hamstring where they don't want to push it too much. If he's comfortable enough playing 16 minutes with his shoulder, I would expect that he's comfortable enough playing the full game with his shoulder as well. So I think that's really good news for Matty Cash. And then Douglas Luiz is the other sort of semi-popular FPL option, got 16 minutes as well alongside Cash. So that's kind of an update on what happened in Europe on Thursday. I think the big concern for me is around Brighton minutes. I just think they're so difficult to predict at the moment. I think Liverpool looks slightly easier to predict based on the minutes. And the only slight concern I suppose we have is probably around Tsimikas, just because he got that half, didn't look great, and we just don't know what Klopp thinks regarding that left-back situation. So a few people wanted to sort of discuss Heung-min Son, especially in relation to the fact that Maddison is injured, and they've also got some injuries and suspensions to their defenders too. Is Son a sell now? The fixtures coming up aren't ideal for Heung-min Son over the next 4 or 5 game weeks. We'll just bring up the fixtures now. So over the next 4, they've got Wolves, Villa, Man City, West Ham. They've then got Newcastle, Forest away, Everton at home. Some of them are green on the fixture ticker, but Newcastle's not great. Forest away isn't ideal. Everton have been defending fairly well. City in there as well. They're not perfect fixtures for Heung-min Son, I will admit. But I also think there are some great ones in there. Villa in 13. Villa aren't very good away from home. And I think Son will play incredibly well in that fixture because he loves a high line. And we know for a fact that Villa will play the high line regardless of the fixture. I also think West Ham in 15 is fantastic too. And we've spoken about the fact that a lot of games are coming thick and fast for Spurs. Heung-min Son just has to play pretty much every minute available, assuming he's fit. So I like Son for those reasons. And it's not like Postecoglou's team is suddenly just going to fall apart. Yes, they may score less goals. And yes, they won't have Maddison providing for Son. But I certainly don't think that Son's just going to go to scoring absolutely no goals now. And again, if Spurs score goals, it's almost definitely now, especially with Maddison not there, it's got to be Heung-min Son, right? They've not even got Richarlison there. So Brennan Johnson, Kulusevski, Son is going to be Son involved in a hell of a lot of them. So am I slightly concerned? Yes, absolutely. I don't think this now means that Son isn't affected at all. But am I concerned enough to bin him off this week and sell him when I don't know for a fact that this will heavily affect Spurs and affect him? I'm less convinced. I suppose a lot of people are looking at Son in their team, looking at that Maddison injury and thinking, could I move to a Saka? Or if you don't want to move to a Saka because of the doubts, which I now wouldn't do, maybe to someone like a Martinelli or even a Matoma. Like, basically, would you sell Son for some of the midfielders with better fixtures over the next few? I'd give him one more week. I think Wolves away is a really good test because they're not a terrible defence, but they are a defence they are a team that will certainly go at you. So I think this will be a game where Son will get chances, and I would love to see how Spurs set up in the absence of Van der Ven, Romero, Udogie, Maddison. Does the team still function semi-effectively? And if they look an absolute mess over the next 1 or 2 game weeks, then of course we can update our thinking and potentially look to sell Son then. So my opinion on this, and it's easy for me to say because I'm happy with the rest of my team, is don't sell him. But if there are players that you desperately want, let's say you absolutely want Bowen and there's no other way that you can get him, I don't think it's a terrible choice to sell him because I do think there will be a slight downturn in their output in the absence of Maddison because I think absolutely everything goes through him. Sort of more of a macro point around taking hits. Should we be risk averse or risk seeking? And the specific question is, what are your thoughts on taking multiple hits when fixtures fall so nicely like this game week? And I know that the manager that asked this question was sort of weighing up a -16 at the moment and just wondering, is it worth it? So many nice fixtures this week, so many players with high upside. Should you do it? My personal opinion on hits is that they are relatively easy to work out on paper if you think you should take them or not. It's not, should you take a -16 because the fixtures are good? It's, will the player that you're bringing in outscore the player that you're taking out by 4 points over the period of time that you are looking at bringing that player in for? So let's say that I am looking at, hypothetically, bringing in Ferguson for João Pedro for a -4. Over the next 3 to 4 weeks, do I think that will pay off? That's the first question to answer. If your answer is yes, you do think that over the period, next few game weeks, that the player that you bring in will outscore the one that you take out by more than 4. The next question I would ask you is, do you need to take the hit for it this week, or can you do it in one of the future weeks for free? I.e., do you have future moves that you think you will need to make that will mean that regardless of whether you do it this week or next week, this will always be a transfer that requires a hit? Or can you just delay it slightly? Like, I see a lot of people bringing in like 5 or 6 players, and I'm like, you could technically like bringing in Burmo in 2 weeks. You could bring in Palmer in 4 weeks. You could bring in Jared Bowen. I don't think this is the best fixture for him this week. You could bring him in next week. So I think there are most players where you look at it and think you don't need to bring them all in this week. So my answer to it is play the game how you want. If you want to take hits, take hits. If you think it will pay off, do it. Don't look at it as one massive hit. Look at it as trying to weigh up the players that you're bringing in versus the players that you're taking out. Do you need to make them this week? And how confident are you that it will pay off? I think on a single basis, taking a -8 or a -12 as a one-off doesn't tend to backfire too much. It's when you try and do it on a regular basis, more often than not, you will take out a couple of players that will haul, and you will bring in a few players that go on to blank. And I think over time, if you consistently take hits, it doesn't tend to pay off. Because it's almost like gambling too much, right? If you keep gambling, you don't always win. You will eventually lose. And I feel like there's a similar situation with taking hits. And I also think, why are you taking the hit is the other thing to consider. Like, is it an emotional reaction to the fact that we've just had a poor game week? Are you taking out players that are actually fantastic, fine options, just on the basis that they've blanked once or twice? Like, I saw someone was taking a -8, which involved removing Watkins because he's blanked for 2 game weeks, but his data's been good and it's a great fixture this week. So on top of all of that stuff I said about it, think about the reasoning behind why you are potentially considering taking the hit. And if you think it is a logical, sensible decision, would you advise someone else to take the hit that you are thinking about doing? And often when you think about the advice you would give to others, I do it sometimes, right? I'm looking at Maddison replacements this week. When I was giving advice to you guys, I was like, well, I would probably bring in a penalty taker and I would bring in someone that's nailed. My favourite option, as we'll discuss in a second, is Martinelli. And I'm like, hang on a second, Martinelli's not nailed and he's not on penalties. Why am I? So sometimes when you're thinking about the advice you would give to others, you realise that maybe you've got some biases that you haven't considered in your own thinking. So hopefully that helps. But at the end of the day, do whatever it allows you to enjoy the game. If you're not enjoying the game at the moment and taking a hit will allow you to enjoy it more, I would absolutely advise doing that. I've shown my team a couple of times today and I've now made sure that the rank above my head is correct. What am I currently planning on doing? So I've got 2 free transfers and 0 in the bank. Of course, I don't have Erling Haaland. If you've not seen my content yet, that is sort of the big difference about my team. And I absolutely will be bringing Haaland back in relatively soon because he's the best option in FPL alongside Mohamed Salah. Nothing has changed on that. And I expect him to do okay this week because Chelsea didn't look good against Spurs before Spurs started getting men sent off. So I think it's a fine week for Erling Haaland. He's absolutely fine as a captaincy option, to be honest. But for me, it's game week 16. Against Luton away that I'm currently planning on bringing Haaland back in. I don't think I need him for the next 4 because if we just look at Alvarez's fixtures over the next 4, Chelsea, Liverpool, Spurs, Villa. That again, I think people get confused. That's not me saying that Man City won't score and it's not me saying that Haaland and Alvarez won't score, but these aren't fixtures where I feel like you desperately need to bring him in, especially when I'd be removing the likes of Trippier, Watkins or Darwin. I feel like I would be making my team weaker overall. So, Haaland-wise, game week 16. For this specific week, I don't need to sell Saka unless in the time between me recording this and the deadline, we get news that he's out like for weeks or months. I don't need to sell him because I want him longer term and I've got Alvarez on the bench. Even if he's out next week as well, I can just play Alvarez again. I know it's not ideal because the fixtures, as I said, for Alvarez aren't great, but that's one of the benefits about having 8 attackers. It's one of the benefits of going without a Haaland because I allow myself every single week to not have to make transfers with injuries. I could get away this week with benching Saka and Maddison and playing Alvarez and Tsimikas, right? Every single week I can get away with that because I have such good squad depth. Sometimes it creates benching headaches, of course, but sometimes it can be valuable. So Saka for me doesn't need to be sold because I can just simply keep Saka in the team, and if he doesn't play, Alvarez comes on. Maddison I do want to sell because I don't want to rely on Tsimikas. And so for me, I'm currently deciding between a few different players. So if we just skip over to transfers, I am going to want Mbeumo from 14, right? Without a shadow of a doubt, I want that man in my team. Oh, I can't spell. Because the fixtures are good, but not only because the fixtures are good, because he's so nailed. And like I said, you can see here, Saturday the 2nd, Wednesday the 6th, Saturday the 9th, right? These 3 game weeks there, 14, 15, 16. There's 3 game weeks in a week. A lot of these players that we're looking at bringing in probably won't play in all 3 of them. Mbeumo will. And not only that, it's Luton, Brighton and Sheffield United. 3 defences that are really not particularly good. So I want Mbeumo for those 3. And I look at my other 4 players. I probably don't want to remove them. There is a chance that maybe I could remove Bowen because I don't think the fixtures are that great over this spell here. They could certainly be better. But I also love Jarrod Bowen. I think he's fine to keep, especially again due to the amount of minutes he gets. So I guess what I'm saying is in game week 14, that spot there that you can see will probably be Bryan Mbeumo. And as a result, I could just bring him in now. Right? I know he's got Liverpool and Arsenal, but it saves me a transfer. He is on pens. And do you think Brentford will score against Liverpool and or Arsenal? You'd say, yeah, maybe 1 or 2 goals. Will Mbeumo get them? Probably. So it saves me a transfer. it saves me any price rises that happen, because then Burmo will continue to rise in price if he does get returns. And I still really like Brian Burmo as an option. So that is one idea. The other option is bringing in someone for 2 game weeks and then replacing them with Burmo. Or bringing someone in, and then if they perform really well, it could be Jared Bowen that then becomes Burmo, right? So I have the option there. So the 3 players that I'm currently considering are Mitoma, Martinelli, and Eze, right? Those are the 3. I've gone off Mitoma slightly, just due to the amount of minutes that he's had recently, and just due to the fact that Brighton aren't quite clicking. I know they just beat Ajax 2-0 in the Champions League, in Europe, which is great. I'm not convinced still by Brighton at the moment. And I know they have the best fixture in the league this week, but in game week 13, is it Nottingham Forest away? That's not a great fixture. And then in case I do want to keep that player slightly longer term, Chelsea away isn't a great fixture in 14. So I like Mitoma. I've got no issues with him. I could see him getting reduced minutes over the next few, though, and his data hasn't been fantastic this season. So I think it's Martinelli or Eze for me. I love Eze as an option, right? I think Eze's fantastic. He's on penalties, he's on set pieces, his data's very strong too. I've always loved Eze as an option. And the next 4 fixtures are great. Everton, Luton, West Ham, Bournemouth. And then in 16, let's say that I do keep him until 16 because I bring in Burmo for Bowen, then I can bring in Cole Palmer for Eze. So in 16, as Chelsea's fixtures improve, Crystal Palace's start to get a little bit worse. So Eze feels like a really nice option for either the next 2 weeks or the next 4. My concern with Eze is twofold. Crystal Palace are not a fantastic team, at least going forward. They're very good defensively, but not great going forward. And I don't like these 2 fixtures. Everton have been pretty good defensively, and Luton at home are a really not great defence, I'd say. They're very decent, kind of a middling table defence. So I don't actually think, as great as they maybe look when you first glance at them, those are the best 2 fixtures to attack, which leaves me with my current favoured option as Martinelli. But he doesn't not carry his own issues. His data this season has been pretty poor. Arsenal still aren't clicking in attack. And Brentford away in 13 isn't the perfect fixture. But Burnley at home feels fantastic in 12. And Wolves at home and then Luton. Again, Luton isn't a great fixture because it's away, i.e. Luton are playing at home. But I like the Wolves at home fixture in 14 quite a lot. And I still expect Arsenal to get the better of Luton. I then don't even mind these 2 fixtures here from an attacking perspective at least. But it's more than likely it would only be for 2 weeks regardless. I think it's really this fixture here. I've just got a good feeling about Martinelli against Burnley, and sometimes you just got to back your gut feeling. It's not necessarily backed by stats. That being said, Burnley do concede a lot of chances down the flanks. They defend the width of their box very well, but the flanks they seem to let a lot of chances in. So I just think this is a decent fixture for Martinelli. He's passing the eye test for me at the moment. And I think there is a good chance that Trossard starts at the 9. And we know if Trossard does start as the 9, the likes of Martinelli and Saka tend to be a little bit better, as they do with Gabriel Jesus, because when Nketiah plays, he just hogs a lot of the big chances and they don't get into the box as often. So at the moment, if the deadline was now, it probably is Maddison to Martinelli. My main concern with this is that I'm recording this on Friday afternoon to timestamp it around 3 p.m. Martinelli is going up in price tonight probably, and Maddison is probably going down in price. So if I want to make this move, I will do it tonight because there is a 0.2 million loss if I don't make it, and I still want to make the move tomorrow. So it may well be that at the time you watch this or for the deadline stream, I've already made that move. If I've not made that move, it probably means I'm slightly edging towards maybe someone like an Eze instead, because at the time of me recording, he doesn't look like he's rising. So it's something to consider for sure. I just like the idea of getting another Arsenal attacker for Burnley at home. And Martinelli is a player where if I had to keep him longer term, I wouldn't mind keeping him for the rest of the season, in all honesty, as long as he's still getting minutes. So let me know what you think of that down below. Let me know what you would do in my position if you were to use one free transfer on that Maddison spot. Anyone up to 8 million, would love to know your advice. And also make sure to drop your questions down below as well. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 12 deadline decisions video where we round up the press conferences and talk through your final questions and also some of my final team thoughts as well. If you did enjoy today's video and you got any value from it, please do make sure to subscribe to the channel and make sure to smash a like as well. Let's aim for 1,500 likes on today's video. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.